Elizabeth.
Hi, Sandy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Welcome,
How's
everybody.
how's Michigan? Are you staying
Well,
warm?
I will jump right into my positive focus
Okay.
for today, and it is that up in Michigan, we just had our first false spring. Everyone in the upper Midwest, or probably any cold climate, knows you have a few false starts getting into the spring weather, and now it's cold again,
Cool.
which is depressing. But making it through false spring means we are closer to real spring.
Yay.
What about you?
Yay. Oh, I spent a week at my younger brother's. His wife just had their second child, so I got to spend a week with their 4-year-old, and then they brought the baby home, and it was just lovely. And I
Congratulations.
also have much more appreciation for having had two kids myself at one time. It's
Absolutely.
amazing. Anybody does that.
It really is. And now you're giving me another positive focus, which is
Good.
that I passed those years.
I know.
And we
I
have a
know.
lot of, we have a lot of colleagues and clients who are really in the trenches, not just at work, but also at home.
Absolutely.
And it's a tough
Absolutely.
job.
Yeah, my youngest turns 18 in May, so
Oh my goodness.
I'm graduating. Yeah.
Congratulations
Thank you.
again.
We could just talk about this. I'm going to
Yes.
get a piece of jewelry made for myself for his 18th birthday.
I love that. I
Hmm.
always have friends who, when their kids have a birthday, they say, and congratulations to us for
Yeah,
having kept them alive for
exactly.
one more
Yeah.
year. So 18 years, that's a large accomplishment.
It's a transition. Yeah.
Jewelry
Yeah.
worthy.
Yeah. Absolutely. For sure.
Well, onward to Medicare Advantage. I don't know that we have a title yet for this episode, but we've got
Mm-mm.
some hot topics. I think you've brought some updates on some new legislation affecting PBMs.
Yep.
It's felt like that has been on the cusp for years, and Congress finally made it happen.
Yeah, it has. It's fascinating, and it was in the February 3rd spending bill, so it was kind of tucked in. It had been percolating for a while, but was like, bam, here it is. And it's going to be pretty significant. The implementation dates are delayed, so there are commercial reforms that they set a date of January 2029 for those to take effect. The Part D reforms, the dates are going to be set by rulemaking, but they're anticipated to be January 2028. So we do have a bit of a runway, but that'll be here before we know it when you think about every single PBM agreement in the Part D space needing to be amended. That's a lot of work.
That is going
um,
to be a lot of
but
work.
the the most business significant Part D reform is that there's no more pricing that's tied to drug prices. So the PBM's compensation has to be a flat fair market value administrative fee. There's no spread pricing, there's no pricing tied to the drug's price or rebates, which all starts to beg the question, like, what is the PBM's incentive to negotiate good prices if they can't be paid based on having negotiated good prices? But anyway, um, that's the law. Um,
That's a huge change, and
Huge change.
this is perhaps an obvious question, but this affects Medicare Advantage plans with a Part D
Yeah,
benefit, and not just the standalone plans.
yeah, absolutely. So all Part D business, and so what we often see in PBM agreements is even when you have pass through pricing, you do have other incentives for the PBM's performance in its pricing negotiations. So you might have a rebate guarantee
Hmm.
and compensation or other performance guarantees tied to that kind of thing. So and we're going to have to see the rulemaking that comes out of CMS on this, but it's going to be a major change to any. I've never seen a PBM agreement with flat administrative fee and nothing else. So it's going to be interesting to see the feedback that CMS gets in terms of the rulemaking is there any flexibility and like how do you incentivize a PBM to do what you want it to do in terms of if it's really just getting an admin fee for its work? Because that's its work on the claims side. Like that makes sense to me on the claims administration, formulary administration, like accuracy, that all makes sense. But on the negotiation side, I'm really wondering how that's going to work.
That's really interesting. So, thinking through how the agreements will need to change, obviously, all the pricing terms, potentially guarantees and performance incentives. And I'm wondering how they're going to define PBM. I'm sure it's
Good
defined in
question.
the legislation, and if there's room for another industry to crop up that takes over the negotiation, or for PBMs to spin off a part of their business, um, and create another middleman.
Or how much, yeah, how much more work the plans are going to be because we have plan clients that
Mm-hmm.
do their own rebate
Mm-hmm.
negotiations where the pharmacy unit,
Yep.
department within the plan, in addition to the work the PBM is doing, they go directly to manufacturers and have their own rebate negotiations. And they have some rebates that come directly, and those can be tied to formulary placement or other factors. Sometimes there are deals going on with some of these really expensive like gene therapies and
Mm-hmm.
$100,000 or millions of dollars drugs that are even value based like if this works we'll pay you this amount, so you wonder how much this is going to push that negotiation work onto plans that could be good or bad or both, but
And if they'll
it's going to
even
be
be able to do it.
yeah, it's going to be a major shift.
Yeah, because if you have if you're a plan like a Humana with your own PBM, that would presumably be precluded. But
Yeah,
somebody's going to need to do put that pressure on pharmacy. It kind of makes
sure.
you realize the PBMs weren't doing something so bad.
Well, I'm sure they were and they weren't, like
Yeah,
it's always a mix.
yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating though how legislators will get so focused on one problem and then they like pound that with a hammer and create all these other things. So,
Absolutely. It's reminding me of the overhaul to the Part D program that was passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act a number of years ago.
mhm.
And just in terms of how
Was
there
that
were
a
these,
number of years ago? It seems like a couple
I
months ago.
know it seems like yesterday, but I remember there was a long runway to implement these massive structural changes, and you and I were fretting behind the scenes. Nobody's talking about this. How are they going to do it? And
Yeah,
sure enough, they've implemented. The
yeah,
industry has responded, implemented, the payment plan, and there's it's not been without significant financial impacts, but
yeah. They got it done.
they got it done, and they'll get it done again.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
thank you for digging into that.
absolutely.
I'm sure we'll have more to say, as questions start coming in. But echo, I think what you're saying is that even though there's a long runway, the work probably needs to start happening this
Yeah,
year.
for sure. And there is other stuff. That's just kind of um,
Mm-hmm.
the high point as thinking about Medicare plans is that
Yeah.
admin fee requirement, but they're also even in commercial plans, there's going to be 100% pass through requirement. Um, for ERISA plans, uh, PBMs are now statutorily designated as uh, covered service providers.
Oh
So the
wow.
reasonableness and prohibitive transaction rules will apply to them. There are substantial new transparency requirements across lines of business, Medicare,
Mm-hmm.
and commercial. And then in Part D, and this is kind of a mystery how this will be interpreted by the agency, but CMS is going to be called on to define and enforce reasonable and relevant contract terms for PBMs. So they have this expansion. It's sounds to me like a bit of an erosion of
Mm-hmm.
the non-interference clause from Part C that's applied to Part D, but CMS is going to have a larger role in regulation of contract terms between PBMs and pharmacies, as well as Part D plans and PBMs. So stay tuned, how that
That's
will be
really
interpreted.
interesting.
by this administration, and then of course by future administrations.
Hmm. I wonder if there's, have you seen any discussion about legal viability, the viability of legal challenges? I know, the lawsuits about the IRA are still going on. None have been particularly
Yeah.
successful.
Well, there might be like once. My guess is those might occur after rules come out. Like,
Hmm.
did they overstretch the statutory authority? But as far as the statute itself, no.
Um, that's really a big change. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. What's been on your mind, Sandy?
The new compliance program guidance
Yeah,
from OIG, this is a big deal. The last time that OIG put out meaningful guidance for the MA program was in 1999, more
right.
than 25 years ago, when the program was
Medicare plus
still
choice.
exactly
Yeah.
Medicare Part C, Medicare Plus Choice, and so this is really a big deal. The program has changed quite a bit since then. We've talked about how the enormous growth in MA means that it now serves more than half of Medicare beneficiaries, and at the same time, just become a lot more complex. There's a lot more vendors, a lot more delegation, a lot more money
Mm,
flowing between the government and plans and downstream entities, and there's more legal risk and more compliance risk. So I think this guidance is very welcome by much of the industry, right?
mhm.
As long as MA is going to be in the spotlight, it's very valuable to have clear rules for plans to, and not just plans, but all of the stakeholders in the industry to go by. So that's
D-
been very
do you
exciting.
think it gives clear rules? I was talking to a client about like, it says what the risk areas are, but like we knew that.
Yeah, what I find most helpful about the guidance is that it identifies the risk areas, and it also includes a lot of recommendations and practical considerations for mitigating those risks. So we're always looking for best practices to support compliance for our clients. Things that are not rules, they're not strictly required, but are helpful. And there is quite a bit of that in the guidance. One thing to note is that OIG is clear that this is voluntary compliance guidance.
Hmm.
It recognizes that compliance programs are not one size fits all. There's different, expectations for smaller organizations and larger organizations. So this isn't binding, right? The purpose is to help plans identify their own risks and implement an effective compliance program to reduce those risks. On the flip side, OIG does view this guidance as reflecting reasonable compliance practices. So
Mm.
I think a plan or anyone in the industry it would be at your own peril to just ignore these best practices and practical suggestions.
I agree. And I also think those, non-binding sources of guidance are really important to treat as a little more than non-binding if you're, they're very important if you're defending a lawsuit. And
Absolutely.
you can say, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing as part of your defense. We have a good faith compliance program, that kind of thing. So even though they're not part of the CMS guidance that is made binding by the terms of the CMS contract with MA plans, I would treat them as comparable to that, unless something that was specifically recommended was like prohibitively expensive for your organization. I do think organizations need to treat that as a resource that requires like an implementation exercise where you identify any gaps between what you're doing and what's in that guidance. And if you are going to leave a gap, have a really good documented reason why you chose under your facts and circumstances to not adopt a recommendation.
Absolutely, that's excellent advice. I also want to give a plug for our colleague Charles Baker at Ankara. He did an analysis of this guidance. You can find it on LinkedIn, and he talks about some of the parallels between this guidance from OIG. OIG is the Office of the Inspector General within HHS. It is distinct from CMS. And
It's really CMS's oversight body within the agency.
exactly. And Charles talks about how the updated CMS audit protocols are really aligned with this OIG guidance. They need to
Hmm.
be read together, but they reinforce the same concepts, namely the importance of operationalizing your compliance program structure. So it's not about just being able to check the box. We have met the 7 elements of an effective compliance program. You need to show how your processes actually work to monitor and correct compliance issues. And that's an overarching theme of both this guidance and the updated CMS audit protocols.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And the other thing is we the compliance program guidelines were last updated in January of 2013. So this really is the guidance right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't mention risk adjustment. I've searched for it.
Yes, the
It's not
CMS
in it. It's
guidance.
not in there. And so it's very important that this is the kind of latest and greatest instruction.
Absolutely, and it's fairly comprehensive. There's a number of key areas that are covered. It covers the OIG industry guidance covers access to care, which encompasses both network adequacy and utilization management, including prior auth.
Mm,
It covers marketing and enrollment. It does cover risk adjustment, thank goodness. It covers quality of care, so that would be your star ratings measures and provider incentives. It covers broadly oversight of third parties. Um, there's some specific guidance for compliance programs within vertically integrated organizations or organizations with other ownership structures. And then there's a section on um, data accuracy, the importance of submission of accurate claims. And
hmm.
OIG says, the absence of a previously identified risk area does not signal that the risk no longer exists or has
Hmm.
become irrelevant. So this does not supersede any pre-existing guidance from OIG, but this is the latest and greatest on these really hot button issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Um, on
Well,
risk adjustment, I will give you a little preview. And this gets to your earlier question of are there clear rules? Well, no, unfortunately,
no.
right? They reinforce, restate what we already know, which is risk adjustment data has to be accurate. It has to be consistent and compliant with the coding guidelines. Um, what OIG does say is this remains the single most significant fraud and abuse risk in Medicare Advantage. We have persistent concerns with unsupported diagnoses, chart reviews, in-home health assessments, vendor-driven coding inflation, querying or prompting physicians to add diagnoses, weak documentation controls, um, and I think bottom line, what we've been saying for years is that unsupported or aggressive coding practices are going to create risk. But at the same time, the guidance does include a number of recommendations for how to address and minimize the risk of fraud and abuse in this area. So, examples would be to pair the processes that you have for capturing complete uh, diagnosis data, so like a chart review process,
Mm,
with your compliance processes that are designed to ensure accuracy. So we've seen a lot of clients split those two processes apart, which is not per se wrong.
hmm.
But OIG's recommendation is, these should be done together. to really create, a robust compliance focus.
So if you're
OIG,
reviewing charts,
yeah,
do it two-way while you're doing it,
yeah,
basically.
it's efficient.
Hmm.
While you're looking at it, you should, yeah, flag the
Yeah,
things that are not supported and then follow through and remove them from your data.
interesting. Yeah.
Um,
Well, what's really interesting too is the proposal to stop that we talked about in our
yes.
last episode in the advance notice for payment, the proposal to stop accepting codes for risk adjustment from retrospective chart reviews.
Yeah, and I got a sense of a bit of, the left hand not talking to the right hand here when I saw that reference to chart reviews
Yeah.
in this guidance. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what
Yeah, we'll
happens.
see. And they aren't saying it's prohibited, they're just saying we won't
Mm-hmm.
adjust the risk
Mm-hmm.
score based on that. So,
Um, One useful framework that OIG gave here. This is not in the risk adjustment section, but it's in the section on claims accuracy.
hmm
OIG explained how there's really a spectrum of conduct that can all create exposure under the False Claims Act. So, on one end, you have participating in a scheme to submit fraudulent information to
hmm
increase payment. That is nobody that we know is doing that.
No.
That's the most egregious example. But knowingly failing to withdraw inaccurate diagnosis codes that were identified in an audit or should have been identified in an audit, that also can create risk. As can submitting unsupported diagnosis codes that are not consistent, that have not been documented in a way that's consistent with the rules. So if this chart review proposal gets finalized, if you continue to do that, that's going to create exposure under the False Claims Act.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah. Um,
Well, enrollment data is out for
Enrollment
2026.
data.
We talked about trends last time, and they truly continued. The flattening of growth in Medicare Advantage. Um, what's interesting, just as a point of comparison, is about 4 million Americans a year age into Medicare, like 3.5 to
Wow.
4 million a year. And that number has been, growing as just because of the demographics. And from 2025 to 2026, Medicare Advantage enrollment only grew 1.1 million. Isn't that interesting? And
Wow.
we don't know the distribution of age-ins versus people switching
Mm-hmm.
from original Medicare to MA, you know, what how that shakes out. But that's pretty interesting. If 4 million people are aging into Medicare and MA only grows by about 1 million, that's a significant slowdown where what we saw earlier, and thanks to Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF, for the data they analyze on this. The data comes out from CMS, and then they make it understandable, which I truly appreciate. But the growth rate on average in MA between '07 and 2024 was about 9% per year on average. Going into 2025, that slowed to 4%. Going into 26, it slowed to 3%.
Oh my goodness.
So it suggests, that a number of things are happening. One, a lot of people aging into Medicare are not electing Medicare Advantage. Two, perhaps people are choosing who have the opportunity to get some other source of supplemental coverage, either Medicaid or they have VA benefits or they can afford a MedSup program um, policy, they are going potentially from MA back to original Medicare. So yeah, very interesting. And then we heard, at the end of 2025, 10% of MA enrollees lost their plans and had to choose another one. So we don't have specifics on what do those people choose to do, but we are seeing a real flattening kind of at that, in the 35 million people in MA. That is not, the growth curve is way, way less steep than it was a few years ago. Very
And
interesting.
and surely some of this is by design. We did see a number of plans really slow down on their marketing of MA product.
Yes, yes, or either non-renew plans or um, shrink their service
Hmm.
areas or keep plans in place but cut the commissions to their brokers for those plans. And there's a whole controversy around that. But the interesting growth story is of that 1.1 million in growth going into 2026, only about 20% or so 224,000 of those folks were new enrollees in individual MA plans, MAPD or MA plans. Special needs plans were over 80% of the growth,
Oh my goodness.
883,000 new special needs plans enrollees. So
Wow.
SNPs are the hot thing in MA right now. And that's fascinating to me, just as a trend. And we saw one large carrier, Molina, relatively large, Molina, elect to just focus exclusively going into next year on SNPs
Really smart.
for their MA line of business. So very interesting. There's this sense that the flexibilities around care management that you have in special needs plans and just the rigor of the model of care and that model that is becoming increasingly attractive, at least to some MA organizations.
I have a question, and it's did KFF get at all into the distinction between DSNPs and other types of special needs plans? Do we know, if I would assume the majority of that enrollment was in DSNPs.
Yeah, I haven't gone that deep, but that's a
Okay.
really good question. Maybe for next
Yeah.
next
And for
time.
anyone who's
Yeah.
interested, we did spend a fair amount of time in our last episode talking about regulatory changes that affect special needs plans, and some potential future changes affecting chronic condition SNPs.
hmm And I
So,
would, if I were a product manager at a small or to mid-size Medicare Advantage organization, I would be thinking about special needs plans and thinking about, finding or building the expertise to do that product really well, because that does seem like a place where the market is saying this is a place where the MA model really works well.
and you have more flexibility in terms of
Hmm
benefits that you can offer within those, the targeted populations that are in those special needs plans. So I think it's a lot of work. You got to get that contract with the state Medicaid agency,
hmm
but there's a lot that you can do within that structure.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting times.
Yeah. Um, well, it's nice to chat with you.
Yeah, you too.
All right. We'll see y'all later.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sandy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.